Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's breakfast briefing on immigration. My name is Heidi Siegel. I'm the Communication Director for Represent PA, and I'm your host for today's briefing. I believe immigration is something that is on all of our minds, and that might be why we did have over 250 people sign up for this morning's discussion. I also believe that we're a nation of immigrants, founded by immigrants, and so we need to do a better job for our immigrant population. They're our neighbors and our colleagues. They're in our schools and our communities, and they're human beings, and they deserve to be treated that way. Tiffany, if you can bring up the slides. I think, so what can we do about this today? Hoping that we get these slides set up so I can just show you a few of the headlines that we're probably all reading in the newspapers and online every day.
Sorry, I don't know why that is not sharing. Let me try that again.
Okay.
Okay, let me know if that works.
That's great.
Okay.
So these local headlines are just a few that we pulled to give you all a sense of what we're reading. And I think that, is causing us some concern. And hopefully our speakers today are going to, be able to walk us through what we can and can't do to help these folks that are in our communities. But I do feel like a lot of what we see in the news every day makes these folks feel like they're the enemy. And when you use words, like raid and, just uncertainty and crackdown, you do feel like you're fighting a war, which is not necessarily the way anybody wants to see this handled. So our speakers today are going to talk to us about this. The first person I'm going to introduce is Victoria Francis. She is the Deputy Director of State and Local Initiatives for the American Immigration Council. Next, we have with us State Representative Johanny Cepeda-Freytiz from Berks County, and she's also the chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Latino Caucus. And finally, our moderator today, Jane Goldblum, who is the founder and of counsel for Goldblum Pollins Dennis, where she practiced immigration law for more than 30 years. So enough about me and the program. It's time for me to turn over to the experts. So Victoria, I'd like to start with you to get us going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all having me here. Again, my name is Victoria Francis. I'm the Deputy Director of State and Local Initiatives at American Immigration Council. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization who really believes in creating a fair and just immigration system and acknowledging the contributions that immigrants bring to all of our communities. And so I'll first dive in and just talk about what states can do and really thinking about what's possible. So although the U.S. immigration policies are determined at the federal level, state and local governments play a crucial role in supporting their immigrant community members, promoting community safety, and ensuring the well-being of all residents. Under the current administration, immigrants, especially those who are undocumented, are more vulnerable to things like federal enforcement and discrimination. And so state and local communities can help reduce this vulnerability by implementing measures that do things like protect sensitive data, promote economic security, and addressing discrimination based on immigration status. And so while states can't change someone's immigration status, these actions can help to reduce fears among immigrants that everyday activities like going to work or taking your kids to school might lead to contact with federal immigration enforcement. Supportive policies at the state and local level, they also convey the message that while states don't have the authority over immigration law, they're not going to intentionally try to make life more difficult for undocumented immigrants living in their communities. So I'm going to go over some of the ways that state and local leaders can do this work and then provide examples of the types of policies we've seen advanced or introduced this legislative session across the country. I'll also follow up with Represent PA with a full list of hyperlinks to all the bills. So I won't go over each bill in detail. I'll do some summaries and then send the information along if you'd like to read the bill text. But the first area I'll start with is federal immigration enforcement. So there's no obligation for state and local jurisdictions to use their resources to help with immigration enforcement. They do have to comply with federal law, but they don't have to offer up their law enforcement resources to do federal immigration enforcement work or to help make ICE, so Immigration and Customs Enforcement's job easier. So policy options include things like prohibiting employers from providing voluntary consent to an immigration enforcement agency to non-public areas unless they have a judicial warrant. So making sure that government, private businesses, that everyone in the state is following the laws and not kind of offering up access to ICE, but following very specific state and federal laws and making sure that ICE has to do their job and provide a warrant. One thing we've heard from ICE officials, and there's kind of been some media attention around it, is that people knowing their rights has made it more difficult for ICE to do their job. It's requiring them to go the extra step to follow all the steps because they're going to people's doors, they're going to people's places of work, and people are saying, nope, like I know my rights, you have to have a warrant, you have to do this. And so just making sure that people are complying with existing laws, but also strengthening things where you can. Also prohibiting law enforcement from detaining an individual based only on the violation of federal immigration law. You could also do things like restricting the use of city or state resources like staff, buildings, public lands that would aid in the detention of individuals. For example, there's a proposed bill in New York right now that restricts municipalities from using resources for immigration detention facilities without legislative approval and establishes a committee for oversight and compliance with federal standards. Another thing that states are doing is prohibiting the signing of 287G agreements by state and local entities. In case a 287G agreement isn't something you're familiar with, they're essentially agreements between local law enforcement. So local law enforcement opts into these agreements with the federal government, and they deputize select local law enforcement officers to perform certain functions of the federal immigration enforcement kind of purview. So things like issuing immigration detainers to hold individuals until ICE can take custody, entering data into ICE's database, issuing notice to appears, which is the official document to begin removal proceedings, and making recommendations for detention, transferring non-citizens to ICE custody. So limiting those types of agreements and cooperation. The next area is data privacy and protection. So these are policies that restrict the collection or sharing of information by state or local governments. And they're essential for protecting the privacy of all community members, including immigrants. They also help to prevent against discrimination, harassment, and even deportation. So policies can include limitations on information collected by government agencies in the first place, including immigration status, unless it's required by law, or for program eligibility. So really thinking through whether or not the information that's being gathered has a purpose, how it's being stored, and how it's being shared. A few policy examples include policies that restrict the collection of immigration-related data in the first place. So state or local governments never even ask the information to start off with. There's a bill in Hawaii, for example, that prohibits certain educational and healthcare facilities in the state from collecting immigration status information and restricts ICE access to that data to help ensure due process and civil rights protections for immigrants in the state. Also policies that specify how and why the data can be shared. So for example, is there a warrant to share the data, or ensuring only disaggregated information is shared with federal government law enforcement, or specifying that information cannot be shared with federal law enforcement except as required by state or federal law, meaning like a court subpoena or a warrant. So being very specific about how information is gathered, how it's stored, when and how it's also shared. Next area is economic security. As of 2022, 3.2% of the US population is undocumented, and they make up about 4.5% of the nation's workforce. In Pennsylvania, Undocumented immigrants make up 1.6% of the workforce, and they have a combined spending power of over $3.4 billion. They also pay about $386 million in state and local taxes. So policies that help maintain their economic security and ensure businesses have continuity in their workforce are incredibly important. Policies range from things like increasing access to occupational licensure regardless of immigration status. So we see a lot of states, Pennsylvania included, who've kind of done some work on workforce inclusion, but basically saying if immigration status isn't required for something, like it's not the job of regulatory agencies to investigate someone's immigration status. We're here to provide the credentials. If they meet the qualifications, we're not here to verify immigration status. Also restricting the use of E-Verify in the employment process to prevent discrimination in the hiring practices, or calling out specifically how these practices can be discriminatory, and providing guide rails for businesses to use if they are using E-Verify. Some states allow individuals to use an ITIN number, so an individual taxpayer identification number for state earned income tax credits, or allow ITIN holders to access small business support or entrepreneur programs, essentially kind of evaluating when a social security number or an ITIN number can be used to access different services and programs. A lot of individuals who are undocumented do have an individual taxpayer identification number. It allows them to pay state and local taxes, to have that kind of federal government number where they can do different things. And so thinking about at the state level how that can be used, kind of like an or situation for your social security number. You can use your ITIN number or your social security number. Another option is creating an unemployment fund specifically for undocumented immigrants. Colorado, for example, created a benefit recovery fund, which is an unemployment compensation program for eligible undocumented individuals who have lost employment through no fault of their own. So creating that economic security, or that safety net that other individuals have access to, recognizing that there are oftentimes undocumented individuals become unemployed through no fault of their own. The next category is anti-discrimination. So it's another area to ensure immigrants aren't being targeted or discriminated against because of their immigration status. So for example, policies that penalize employers who disclose or threaten to disclose an employee's immigration status to hide violations of state wage, benefit, or tax laws. Other state policies have prohibitions against landlords disclosing immigration status or threatening to disclose immigration status of their tenants as a means of harassment or retaliation. Also things like preventing discrimination on access to services and programs like housing, employment, and other public accommodations based solely on immigration status or perceived immigration status. A few examples include in Virginia, the state criminalizes extortion involving threats to report someone's immigration status. And a bill in Minnesota last year prohibits a landlord from increasing rent, decreasing services, or altering existing rental agreements based on a tenant's immigration status. The last category I'll talk about is access to legal services. Individuals in immigration proceedings or before an immigration court do not have a right to a government-funded attorney, meaning many of these individuals, including children, may face complex legal processes alone, with outcomes directly linked to whether or not someone has access to representation. So policies that fund immigration legal services increase communities' capacity to offer pro bono representation, because we know having greater access to legal support improves immigrants' chances of a fair and just process, including for those who are in deportation proceedings. Right now, for example, Hawaii has a bill that establishes due process in immigration proceedings to provide legal representation to individuals in immigration related proceedings. Other states have prioritized state funding for individuals who are detained. In Colorado, for example, where I am, we have a legal defense fund. Some municipalities have the fund. The state also has a fund. And essentially what it does is it gives funding to nonprofit legal service providers to provide representation for individuals who are in deportation proceedings, with a prioritization of individuals who are also detained. It then also splits the money up. Kind of there's a formula to make sure it gets out to rural communities, and being very, very strategic about where those types of funding can be used. And then lastly, some states have started to think about how to increase legal capacity for this type of work, whether it's through funding programs at law schools to do clinics, so maybe a local law school providing state funding to help create an immigration legal clinic, or increasing the number of Department of Justice accredited immigration reps who can provide legal support. So DOJ accredited immigration reps are individuals who don't have to go to law school, but they can go through a DOJ program to be accredited to do immigration related work. And so there's a lower barrier to entry because they're not having to go to law school. It also helps to engage individuals who are from impacted community members to really do this type of work to increase the support that's available to newcomers who need things, including immigration defense or deportation defense, to adjustment of status and everyday more routine things. So just thinking about how there can be increased access to things that people need, knowing that getting people closer to citizenship typically has a lot of benefits and protections for them, as far as they're no longer being targeted for detention or deportation, and so kind of prioritizing people's access to the full scope of legal services. But again, I'll follow up and share specific examples of the different policies I spoke about so that you all can read the bill text yourself. But I'll go ahead and stop there for now.
Victoria, thank you. I just wanted to say a few things, and then Jane, I know you'll probably have some thoughts, but the information that you just heard Victoria share was in essence very state focused, and that means that there are states in the US that are able to put these sorts of policy protections in place to supplement what a lot of us feel, which is that because the immigration battle is being fought at the federal level and is based rooted in federal law, it's very difficult for that potential for true freedom for these folks to exist without that federal law changing. And so in the policy pieces that Victoria just walked us through, there's the acknowledgement of that challenge, and then there are the things that states are trying to do to just make life a little bit more comfortable for some of these people. So as she said, she will send out that resource. We'll share it out in our recap. But Jane, I'll let you talk for a little bit now, and then I think it will be interesting to hear from Johanny about what, if anything, is being explored in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. We could talk about this for hours, but one of the things I wanted to share, because I think it is so important, is to underscore or explain who are the 13 million undocumented in the US. How is it that they are still undocumented? And if they are picked up, detained, arrested, what are their options, frankly, if any? So first, I'd like to just explain who they are not. They are not those who possess a document evidencing their unexpired lawful status. This includes foreign students, visitors of short duration, here for business or pleasure, those who have working visas. And I want to add, there are just a few working visas. There are, for example, non-immigrant working visas for skilled and unskilled workers. And I want to emphasize that point. But those who have working visas include H-1B professionals, seasonal workers, workers who are here for a specific short time, a season, intracompany transferees, treaty traders and investors, and O-1 foreign nationals of extraordinary ability. These are our scientists, our sports gurus, and those in the arts who have proven to be extraordinary. Who else is here legally? those who are from 17 countries granted temporary protected status. There are currently about 1 million in this status, which President Trump may or may not terminate. You probably read that last week he terminated Venezuelans who held this status. If such status is terminated and they don't leave, they would or could become undocumented. The immigrants who are also in legal status are those who might have been overstays but entered into a real marriage with a U.S. citizen and have filed for permanent residence based on that status. And now they have a document, such as an employment authorization document. Also, those who are granted employment authorization having a document based on their still pending non-frivolous claim for political asylum. The backlog for unadjudicated asylum claims is currently over 2 million. But until their applications are denied and no appeals are pending, each applicant is documented or in lawful status. So let's talk about the 13 million we hear about all the time who are terrified of removal because they are undocumented. They include what we call EWIs, those who entered without inspection. Those who are overstays, who entered with a valid visa, such as a visitor visa, and stayed for at least a year after their visa's expiration. Yes, this includes millions who entered with tourist visas and stayed for years after their stay expired. Those who entered with a visa but violated the terms of the visa. That could include a student who is working without authorization at a restaurant. It includes those who committed a crime which provided for jail for at least a year, even if they never served a day. They include millions and millions of working unlawfully in skilled or unskilled jobs, often with a fake Social Security number, working in construction, in restaurants, in hotels, in nursing homes, in homes as domestics or caregivers, in any year-round position that doesn't require a four-year degree. And why? Because Congress never provided a visa for skilled and unskilled workers. These foreign nationals, if working, would be working unlawfully and thus subject to the 10-year bar. What is the 10-year bar? And this is probably one of the most important facts to convey and to share. In 1996, Congress passed a law which in essence provides that if a foreign national overstays his or her stay by 1 year or more upon his or her deportation or departure for any reason, like going home for a funeral, he or she is barred, unable to return to the U.S. for 10 years. That, my friends, is why the 13 million don't want to depart via deportation or any other way. That's why they don't go home for weddings or funerals and haven't since 1996. And I want to also state that when was our last amnesty for the undocumented? That frankly it was passed by President Clinton just as he was leaving office, and it terminated April 30th of 2001. And what it provided was an avenue for the undocumented to become legal by filing a family-based or employment-based case and paying a fine, a fairly substantial fine at that time, which enabled them not to depart the U.S. And that amnesty, if you want to call it that, because it was based on family or employment, was so successful that President Bush wanted to extend it, and then we had 9/11. So essentially, since that period of time, 1996, 1997, there has been no way for the 13 million to obtain I would say basically no way for the 13 million to swiftly obtain legal status. So then my final question is, but if they're caught, and Victoria did a very good job of explaining how they may not be caught. But if they are caught because ICE goes to places where they typically work, such as construction sites or hotels, etc., do they have any way to prevent deportation, to stay here? For any immigration judge or appellate court to ultimately grant them the legal status that they have yearned for so many years? The real answer is there are few options, but let's talk about them. If someone who has been picked up, married, entered into a real marriage with a US citizen, that's the way. Cancellation of removal, and that's an avenue which my firm handled a few of these cases. My firm is an employment-based firm, but we always felt committed to handling on a pro or partial pro bono basis cases that we felt we could win. Cancellation of removal. What is the requirement? That they were here for 10 years in good moral character, in other words, no arrests, and that they could prove that their deportation or removal would cause extreme and unusually extreme hardship to a qualifying relative, which could be a US citizen child. If the foreign national fears persecution, death, torture, yes, he can apply for asylum. And if he doesn't qualify for asylum because he missed the 1-year deadline or can't prove circumstances change, then he or she could apply for what's called withholding of removal or protection against the convention against protection under the Convention Against Torture. And yes, with a different president and Justice Department, prosecutorial discretion or deferred action. One of the points I wanted to make is, okay, they're picked up, they're put in detention, what happens? There's over a 3.5 million case backlog currently in immigration court. Any foreign national who doesn't have a order of removal or hasn't been convicted of a disqualifying or crime can basically go to court, can submit a case for asylum, for example, as long as it's not frivolous. And typically these cases may not be winnable, but they're not frivolous. And an asylum case can take 6 years to be heard. So I want to sort of leave that with you to understand the magnitude of what President Trump is talking about. He wants to get rid of 13 million people without offering any kind of legalization or amnesty, such as the one that was passed in 2000, over 24 years ago, and is saying, I'm going to detain 13 million people, many of whom then can submit applications for asylum, for example, enter that court system and add to the 3.5 million person or case backlog. So it's quite a, it's a reality check, correct? But I wanted to share that immigration perspective with you, in large part to understand why the undocumented have not been able to legalize their status, even though they've been here. So many of them have been here over 10 years, over 20 years.
Jane, thank you so
That's why
much.
so many of our immigration practitioners and advocates have been begging for comprehensive immigration reform.
That was very comprehensive, and I appreciate that perspective, and I think our audience does as well, because there are some questions that are popping up that hopefully, will be much more aligned with what Johanny has to say. We all, being part of this organization, are anxious to know what can be done at the state level. Victoria gave us some insight about what's happening in other states. But I think we are in an unfortunate position where there isn't a whole lot that is being done in Harrisburg as of yet. But Johanny, I'd like to turn things over to you now to hear your perspective.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can you see me? I don't know what's going on with my camera.
No, there you go.
There we go. Good morning. First of all, Representative PA, thank you so much for hosting, for gathering us and for providing this space so that we can learn and also kind of get some marching orders so we can reactivate and figure out how we can be more proactive in our role, whether that is as a state legislator or as a neighbor, or as school board, city council, and so on. And so you are right. It doesn't seem like we've done much or enough at the state level, which is very frustrating to me. I have become the chairwoman of the Latino Legislative Caucus here in PA, and I'll tell you what we've done so far. We've heard from the governor's advisory commission on Latino affairs, and they reported back in terms of some of their work. We also asked our commissioners to make sure that they're engaging our governor and making sure that we at least don't share data of any kind to the federal government. I've met with a representative from John Fetterman's office. I've done virtual calls with our Congresswoman Houlihan, and it seems like there is very limited information. So what our lawyer did, our legal team from our caucus, obviously put together a list of resources throughout the Commonwealth of where we can refer people to. We also have a Know Your Rights, which is a guide for immigrants and immigrant families in Pennsylvania. That's about a 28-page long document with videos and links and knowing your rights and understanding what to do at work, at home, if you're walking to the grocery. I've also been, and this is information, so at the moment we're disseminating information. We're empowering also our staff to make sure that they're equipped with the tools that they need. So when we get the phone calls or we get the visits, and we've gotten a few. Some of my colleagues have gotten a few, especially in the Philly area. And we're also participating in clinics and having a presence and pretty much letting our community members know that they don't stand alone, that we have their back, that we're going to do the best we can to always protect and provide them with information. We also work with, here in the Reading area, a Hispanic center. They've been doing some clinics. Make the Road has been doing training for folks on knowing their rights, how to use their cards, right? Because we can't equip them with these cards if we don't train them on how to use them. And so we've been just active mobilizing within our community. But as far as policies and bills, the sad reality is that in the House, we're the majority by one. Unfortunately, we did lose one of my colleagues, so we're 101. And the position of our leadership, right? State, federal, we try to keep it as separate as possible because there's certain things we can't do at the federal law. However, everything is driven by numbers and votes. And so they're very careful in terms of what policies and bills they want to refer to committees, what do they want to call on the floor. And so everything is, unfortunately, it's a strategy. Everything has to be strategic in terms of what we do so that we can get things passed. I do have to say, though, in my last term, we definitely were able to block a lot of the E-Verify amendments that would come up on bills, and we intend to do the same. I personally have been working on looking at for certification purposes. So for example, I believe I might have shared with this group in my last term, removing the U.S. citizenship requirement to become certified as a teacher. I just recently passed a bill, actually this week, to remove the U.S. citizenship requirement to become a certified poultry technician. And so, again, we're disseminating information, knocking on doors, being a visible entity within our community, letting people know that they're not alone, that we're here to support them in however way we can. In addition, I've also met with church groups and community leaders to making sure that, we're mindful, with our food pantries, with clothing, to be mindful about what it is that our undocumented folks need, because unfortunately, people are in fear. People are not going outside. Children are not participating in extracurricular activities. Some people are not going to work. And so empowering them to know that they have to remain calm, vigilant, but not to stop living their life. And, and it's been hard, and it's been depressing. I've been in groups where, people are crying, they're in tears because they're so fearful. Because unfortunately, the sad reality is that we are being racially profiled. I include myself in that because I am the daughter of immigrants. And, you know, they're looking for people who look like me. And so we're doing a lot of communicating. I mean, I was also speaking to the mayor of the city of Reading, and they have their internal policies with their police to make sure that they're not data sharing with ICE or participating unless they're looking for a criminal, an act of violent person who's committed a severe act of violence. They're not data sharing. The schools, our schools, the same thing, unless they have a warrant signed and we see the document in the Know Your Rights specifically, they detail and show an image of what this warrant should look like. And so, again, disseminating these documents, this information to everyone, including our school board members. Another thing that we've done with the Latino Caucus is that we have compiled a list of local Latino elected leaders throughout the Commonwealth. We know that this is not just a Latino issue, right? This is an immigrant issue, and we come from various parts of the world. However, we've been also disseminating that information to all Latino local elects across the Commonwealth. So again, I almost feel like my hands are tied, and I wish I could do a whole lot more. But right now, using my voice and making sure that people are mindful of their neighbors and that we're protecting our neighbors.
Thanks, Johanny. I appreciate that you're trying to do whatever you can. And I think what we're going to get to now are some of the questions that have come up in the chat. But first, I want to ask a question actually to you, Johanny. I didn't know if you were familiar with some of the other states' policy work that Victoria mentioned in her portion of today's briefing, and whether or not the House or the Senate in Harrisburg are actually looking at what other states are doing and have been accomplishing, and if that is something that might ever make it through both sides of the chamber in Harrisburg, because we all understand that we're hamstrung up there, but I think it's a good policy to learn from other states where there are some successes happening and see if we can follow in their footsteps.
So there's a group, I mean, there's several of us, right? So obviously the Latino Caucus and the Black Caucus, you know, we're a united front, and we've joined forces to have these conversations and brainstorm in terms of what policies can we be, or what laws can we be discussing and putting forth so that we can put these protective measures in place. You know, again, you know, the politics of it all is what tends to take precedence, and it's very hard. Yeah, I wish I had more to offer, but we're constantly actively looking. The issue is, how far will those efforts take us? Because we're not going to quit. We're going to keep insisting. But like I said, this week, my certified poultry technician bill was a controversial bill. Do you understand what I'm saying? These are people who are testing our birds for bird flu, right? Like we have an outbreak of the avian influenza, and so I'm trying to. I wish you watched the footage and stay tuned. Am I saying that we're gonna stop? No, we're not gonna resist. We're gonna keep fighting and working. And I do want to learn more and see what other states are doing. And we're gonna keep pushing through and figure out what else we can do. But it is sad, though, that when we look at our documented population, especially those, good amount of them, obviously they're paying taxes. You have folks with tax ID numbers, and our government will take their money and not do anything to create these pathways for them to become permanent residents and ultimately U.S. citizens. So I hate that members of our community are being exploited to that degree, and that as a state legislator, I almost feel, like my hands are tied. Like I wish I could do more to change things, and this is where I'm at. I wish I had more to offer and more to share. You know, what I've also been encouraging people is, because in addition to knowing your rights and immigration resources for folks, we're giving them contact lists of all their representatives at the federal level, and we're telling them you need to call. Everyone needs to call, everyone needs to email, everyone, if you can visit their local offices, do so. but we have to put the pressure on our elected from both sides of the aisles, because this is it's a humanity issue. These are people that we're talking about, and it's heartbreaking for me, you know, for the children, right? Their parents brought them into this country, right, for pursuit of that American dream, to provide them better, to provide them a better education, a better environment overall. And some of these kids are being directed to go from school straight home. So you can only imagine that mental anguish. So we have to be more mindful in terms of making sure that, at the state level, through funding, that we're continuously funding organizations that can do this work, to provide them with spaces and mental health support, and provide them with resources. I think that's where we're at. The governor just gave a budget address, and now we're going to be working on the budget, but I think it's not looking at how we do this legislatively, but how do we use our resources to make sure that we are supporting organizations that are at the forefront working with our undocumented community.
Go ahead, Jane.
There's so much to respond to. I'd actually like to follow up what Victoria had said before about access. One of the needs of the undocumented community is to somehow have access to legal counsel, to legal representation. One of the really sad issues that has emanated from this administration, and I'm talking about President Trump's administration, because understand, this is federal law. We all have to look at what federal law is doing. He has directed that funds that go to some of our most effective voluntary agencies have been cut. What does that mean? Nationality Services has gotten rid of a lot of their staff. They can't pay them. HIAS, so these organizations that have been the advocates and representatives of the indigent immigrant population no longer have, or temporarily or maybe permanently, no longer have the funding to represent the documented. There are articles after articles that suggest that those who are unrepresented fare much, much worse when they're in immigration court. Many of them don't show up. Well, what does that mean? If you don't show up, there's an order of removal. An ICE person can literally expedite the deportation of someone who has an active order of removal. Trump activated a law that said that it is a crime if you don't carry proof of your legal status. It is a crime if you don't report where you live. All of a sudden, now we have people who can be guilty of a crime for something that hasn't been enforced in 40 plus years. But I really do feel, and this is again is what Victoria was saying, is that some states have started to build or have started to collect funds to help the unrepresented get representation. And that is probably one of the most important things that we can do for the undocumented at this time. I mean, it is a terrifying period for the undocumented. They're not going to go into households, but they are going to go into the places where they typically work, whether it's landscaping or construction or farms or whatever. And if in fact there is a warrant, they're going to be detained, and we have to face that reality and think of how we can help them in the event that happens.
So actually, Jane, one of the things you just said, and a question that came up in the chat is, and I don't know if who has an answer to this, but in this situation where someone is arrested and there's a challenge in court, is that individual then kept in detention, or are they released until they can hear that challenge in front of a judge?
It had, that whole area is in flux with this new administration. Obviously, they're going to want to keep these people in detention despite the costs. They will, in the past, they have let people out who were not a flight risk. If they're a flight risk, then there's a greater probability of prolonged detention.
Okay. All right, so there's a couple of other questions. Is there anything that can be done to get more people to become citizens more quickly? And I have a feeling the answer to this is just that the backup in the legal system is preventing a lot of this speed and things that are, we all wish for.
Yeah, so some of it is.
Again,
Oh,
I just want to mention that question. Think of what I just said, the 10-year bar. In order to obtain a green card, you have, on an employment basis, there's a 3-step process. The last step would require an undocumented person to depart the US. And upon departure, they would be subject to the 10-year bar. So the immigration community or the immigration lawyers and advocates haven't been able to represent on an employment basis undocumented for 24 years because they are subject to the 10-year bar. They marry a US citizen and it's a real marriage. That's a whole different case. So what you're hearing is a person has to become a permanent resident before he or she is eligible for citizenship. And the bar to obtaining permanent residence is extremely, extremely high.
And then I'll just add that in addition to what Jane is saying, communities have prioritized increasing access to citizenship naturalization services, because once you do go through that process, you do become a lawful permanent resident and you get closer to citizenship, you find that it's a really, really expensive process. So some local communities have leaned into providing grants or funding to help people pay for the citizenship application or for the naturalization prep and testing, increasing legal services. So often it's difficult if you have a complicated case or you need to ask for a waiver or there's something maybe amiss on your record. Obtaining citizenship can be that much more difficult because you need to access a lawyer. So it's also increasing services and access for people who are at that point of their journey, as well as education, because not everyone might not be familiar with the process that you need to go through and where to access different services. So there are things that you can do to increase access to citizenship services for people who are likely eligible.
But again, they have to become permanent residents and be in that status for 5 years before they can apply for US citizenship. And what I'm underscoring or basically saying, you've got to work with you've got to communicate with our federal leaders, the Fetterman and McCormick. In other words, to say, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to give them a path to become legal permanent residents. Those who commit crimes are inadmissible, but a huge percentage of that 13 million are good, hardworking people who deserve to have a path to legal status.
So a couple of other questions, I think more about, related to protecting these folks in this concept of sanctuary. One question came in, what happens to children who ICE detain from schools? Do they go into holding cells? Are they separated from their parents? Do we know?
Is the question if the parents get picked up by ICE while the children are at school?
The question says, what happens to children ICE detains at school? So I think it's about the children.
I don't have a specific answer to that. I'm happy to ask our federal policy team to get more information. But one thing that communities can do to help address these type of issues is creating family plans. So a plan that's essentially like you might be at risk of deportation and putting together a plan that says, if the parents get picked up by ICE, for example, who do the school know to call to notify to pick up the children? What is the family plan? What are the passwords to all the accounts you need? And so having those things in place ahead of time, and also working with safe school administrators, which is why it's also so important for schools to engage in this work and to create safety for families. So if a family might say, hey, like this is our situation. If something happens, here's our plan for our children who are at school. But I'm happy to also follow up and get more information about a child who's detained.
Yeah, thanks. There's another question, if there's anything religious groups specifically can do to help provide sanctuary to any undocumented individuals.
I think one of the shocking, not proposals, but policy changes of the Trump administration is to basically announce that churches, synagogues, mosques are no longer sacred places that ICE won't enter. And therefore, and furthermore, Trump has issued that people who do not cooperate with ICE could be prosecuted. So there are articles in Massachusetts where I think they've gone after people who have tried to stay in the way of ICE. I underscore what Victoria said, that it's really important to know that ICE needs a judicial warrant. And that's a really important part for everyone to recognize. But that's not going to keep ICE from going into some of these places previously, where previously they did not go. If they go into schools, I mean, I've been reading that schools have been circulating policy, what they will do. They're not looking for the innocent child. They're looking for kids that are involved in gangs or involved in drugs. That doesn't necessarily mean the schools will turn them over, but the kids who are just, most of these kids probably have very, very little to fear.
Okay, great. Another question that came in is, what are the best organizations to support which offer legal services to those who are detained? I think we heard a lot about the systems of the legal providers being very taxed. So are there specific organizations that can receive our support?
Basically, immigration, the USCIS, and actually the immigration courts have a list of pro bono services, as well as immigration attorneys who represent or would represent the undocumented. I know the American Immigration Lawyers Association has a fairly active pro bono unit. But again, as I mentioned, funding has been dramatically reduced to these organizations. So I don't even know what their capability is. I'm personally housing refugees right now, and the organization that brought them here, Nationality Services, is a fraction of what they were a couple months ago. So, we're still learning whether these organizations are able to be financially effective.
Johanny, go ahead.
Yeah, I asked my chief of staff, Dolores, to share with Tiffany all the immigration resources and all the information that we were provided to share so that she can share with the group. I also wanted to add that in my community and part of my district, I've also been working with the Latino Chamber of Commerce to train employers in our community so that they're also aware that if ICE comes in, they need the judicial warrant, because it's important for everybody to be equipped with the right information so that we're all still empowering, right, our community members, especially the undocumented, and making them feel safe wherever they enter. And so I just wanted to put that out there as well, that, it's about spreading this word and about really teaching people to understand their rights so that they know how to carry out their rights. So just wanted to share that piece with you all.
Thanks. There's another comment and question here that this, we're all feeling very passionate and compassionate about this discussion, but it's also an economics issue. And we all know that in some ways, the message about the economy is potentially how we lost the last election. So is there any way to publicize this issue in a more economically angled position, and would that help change the conversation or convince a broader coalition if we switch that?
Absolutely. So American Immigration Council, we actually run something called the Global Talent Chamber Network. It's a network of chambers of commerce from across the U.S. who see immigration as a workforce issue. And so their businesses who are interested in this, they see the value both personally and for their businesses. And so we really try to equip them and other partners, all of you, with talking points about the demographic and economic contributions of immigrants. So I'll actually put this in the chat. It's called Map the Impact, and it provides information at the federal, state, and then municipal, some municipalities, depending on their side, and congressional level about the economic contributions and workforce contributions of immigrants, including undocumented folks, refugees. Because we all know that you go into some spaces and the humanitarian argument is just not landing, but the economic one might. And so really providing that information about these individuals do have jobs. They do keep industries afloat. They are paying state and local taxes. They have incredible spending power. And so losing this workforce or hindering this workforce really impacts the well-being of all people in the community. So really trying to have that frame of like, our economies are stronger. American citizens are stronger when they're working alongside immigrant communities.
I have a suggestion as well. If you look at the 13 million undocumented, a small percentage of them are those who have committed crimes. They will never be granted, or I should never use the word never, but it's unlikely they will be ever able to get legal status. So let's remove them from the picture and then look at the 10+ million undocumented who have great jobs. They wouldn't be here if they weren't working. And allow them, like we did in 2001, to pursue legal status through family or through employment, asking them to pay a fine. In 2001, it was $1,000 per applicant. Let's say it's $10,000 per applicant. Think of how much money the government could raise by creating a path for these people to become permanent residents on a fast basis. I mean, the employment basis could take them 1 or 2 years, not be barred for 10 years. So that is a suggestion we should be passionately conveying to all of our federal representatives, saying pass comprehensive immigration reform that allows this population to seek legal status. And that is a message that I strongly convey and think that would be an economic boon to our country. The cost of detaining and deporting is ridiculously high. Why not allow them to pay their fine and seek a process that would legalize them at last?
Thank you for those words, Jane. I think that we'll use that as our closing for this really fabulous hour of discussion and information sharing. I did have one last slide. Tiffany, I don't know if you want to bring it up, but it was a list of, previous to this discussion, a list of resources that we had put together and compiled for this discussion. It's sort of organized for Pennsylvania resources and then specifically for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh area. But we heard about so many more resources today that are all being compiled in the chat and then will be compiled for all of you. We record these sessions. I think one of the strongest ties to the work that Represent does today is the struggle that we heard coming from Johanny with regard to the fact that we are in a legislative gridlock situation in Harrisburg. And as much as Represent PA was organized and formed to create a more reflective democracy where the representation that we have in Harrisburg looks like each and every one of us, we also know that we can't accomplish anything without continuing to push to elect more and more people who look and think like us and, are ultimately trying to make Pennsylvania a better place for everybody. So thank you so much for our speakers today. Your information was absolutely necessary, and we're grateful for all of the work that you're doing. I hope that you'll consider to continue to support Represent PA in its work to elect these wonderful women. And also, look out for a recap email from us that will summarize all the resources that you heard about today. And if you have any others that you think of that weren't mentioned, please send them our way. We'll try and include them in that recap along with the recording so that you can share that with friends and colleagues who weren't able to join. Thank you so much.